Welcome back to another episode of Kicking It with Coach Red, where we bring you all the news, stories, takes, and opinions about your favorite teams from the Pacific Northwest, from the good to the bad to the Mariners.
The off-season Mariners, baby.
Teased a little bit of this last week and had to get into our Seahawks breakdown, but it's time to talk about the Husky pups. I'm going to call them pups right now instead of dogs because there's a lot of new faces. There's a lot of up and down, new coaching staff, transfers galore, a lot of young guys getting some playing time. This not a lot of guys that you recognize from last year's national title squad still on this team. There's been some highs, there's been some very big lows throughout this season so far. We're going to break that down before College Game Day heads to Indiana for their matchup on Big Noon Saturday, where they play at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time out there in Indiana, and first trip for College Game Day out there, ranked Indiana team. So we're gonna break down the team, look at this matchup, and what the Huskies can do to maybe pull out a sneaker win on the road. But before we do that, why don't I tell you a little bit about us? If you are looking for a guy that is going to slice and dice and just rumble this whole episode through, kind of like a Jonah Coleman type player. Maybe you're looking for a guy like me, your boy, Coach Red. You can find me on X at the real Coach Red, on Instagram at the real underscore Coach Red, TikTok at the real Coach Red. Also find the show over on YouTube. Search Kicking It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, leave a comment or two. And if you're looking for a guy that is very promising, but it's probably only going to make a play or two in this episode, kind of like tight end Decker DeGraff.
Sure.
His first two catches were for tutties. So, first two in college football, two catches, two tutties. He's had a few more since then, no more tutties, but that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a guy like Cain.
Yeah, I'm Kane. You can find me over on Twitter, Kane2406, TikTok, Kane0624. Also follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. Follow us. Do it. Frickin' do it.
So, there's no sugarcoating this. It's not the same team as last year.
No.
You had a lot of graduation to the NFL. You had a lot of guys hit the transfer portal as well. If you really want to look at this offensively, you've got Troy Fantanu, who would be starting for the Steelers if he was not on IR. You got Roger Rosengarten at right tackle for the Baltimore Ravens that has now won that starting job. First round wide receiver in Roma Doomsday, second round wide receiver in Jalen Polk, third round wide receiver in Jalen McMillan. You've got Michael Penix taken 8 overall. Then you look at the defensive side of the ball. You have the likes of Braylon Trice, who goes in the third round. Jabbar Muhammad, who was probably your top corner last year, transfers to Oregon. You lose Dom Hampton at the safety position. So there's a lot of reshuffling that's gone on with this team. And the guys that have transferred in, or some of the guys that have stayed on this team that might not have been big names the last couple of years, have really kind of stepped forward into their new spots this year, or kind of help fill that void that you saw from the players departing. So if you really want to look at this team offensively, you're looking at Jonah Coleman. You've got Cam Davis back from injury, and you've got exciting freshman Adam Muhammad that steps into that Dylan Johnson role at running back. And I think that Jonah Coleman has had his spurts, but he hasn't really had that huge game where he's just rock piling over everybody. He's had exciting moments in almost every game, but they came out this week coming off the bye week and have said, he hasn't been healthy the last couple of weeks, which was surprising because his ability, you saw the highlight reel plays where he's just trucking guys, jumping over guys. And this guy is a bowling ball, 5'9", 225, and he's got speed, he's got power, he's got everything you need.
One of my favorite players to use in college football. It was fun.
Oh, and one of the guys that transferred to UW while Kalen DeBoer was still here during the national title run. It's quarterback Will Rogers. And Will Rogers, I think, has played above expectation. He's coming off his worst game of the season against Iowa. He's clocking in through 7 games at 1,800 yards passing, right? He's sitting there with 12 tutties, or sorry, 13 tutties, 2 interceptions, which those have come in the last game. So this is a guy that has performed pretty well. And you also have the excitement with Damon Williams Jr. So this is a guy that was committed to Arizona, comes over with Jedd Fisch. He's kind of that dual threat type of quarterback, but he's also been pretty accurate when he's been slinging the ball. He actually has a higher completion percentage than Will Rogers, but he's been asked to pass the ball a lot less. You've been seeing him inserted into games more and more as we've come along. But when you look at those guys catching the ball, there's a few guys that stuck out. And the big name that we're not going to talk about just yet, because I know you want to, because he's your favorite player to use in
That's
college
true.
football.
I threw a lot of deep balls to him.
If you look at the most established guy in this wide receiver room, it's Jeremiah Hunter, who was a transfer from Cal, who's had some pretty big years, but has not been seeing a ton of targets throughout the year. You have Giles Jackson, former Michigan transfer, played for the Husky team. You saw him a little sporadically last year, especially when you had Jalen McMillan out,
It's
was
also
when
a
he got a little bit more run.
speedster.
Yeah, he's speedy, shifty, and he's actually the team's leading receiver in receptions and total yardage, and but he's only got 2 touchdowns. But the big guy on this team is Denzel Boston. He's a guy,
It's
local kid out of Washington,
big
bided his time.
figure. I mean, the dude's athletic.
He's got
He
9 tutties.
he bodies dudes when he goes up for the ball. He's kind of a complete receiver. He could run routes. He could do the whole nine. The dude
He
is just a freak.
he's a guy that potentially could go to the NFL next year, but I think if he waits one more year, it's a guy that could be looking at a first or second round grade
Yeah,
on him. I
raising your
think
stock.
I think if he goes in right now, probably a third or fourth rounder, just because there's not a ton of tape on him. But you've also saw some good things out of Nevada transfer. Uh, Laiatu Latu was the second defensive player. First defensive player taken in the NFL draft this year, edge out of UCLA. This is his cousin, came from Nevada. He's been a pretty good little bright spot. And then you've got young Buck Decker DeGraff, who started off the season with 2 catches and 2 touchdowns, but has been a little bit more quiet since. So when you look at this team, your skill players, I think that you're pretty excited about, and they can get rolling. The one thing that has struggled a little bit is your offensive line. You lost your entire offensive line. The big name that they got back was Landon Hatchett, former, I think, 3-star center, but was a top 300 guy. I think he was fringe 4-star. And there was a battle. His brother, Garion Hatchett, ended up transferring to Oklahoma, and I thought he was going too. But stays with the team. He's been getting reps at center, especially because they've had some injury there. But you also ended up getting Ohio State guard. I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try. But looks like their starting left tackle is going to be out in this game. The big problem is once they get into the red zone, they had trouble scoring
They
at
shoot
times.
themselves in the foot, it seems,
Well,
right?
and that's been the Huskies go into this game at 4-3. So they won their 2 first games against Cupcakes. They lose the Apple Cup at Lumen Field to WSU, bounce back against Northwestern, lose in a close one at Rutgers on a Friday night, come back home and take care of business against Michigan, who was ranked number 10 at the time in a national title,
Little
rematch.
rematch.
And then you're feeling good, and they go to Iowa, and I believe that they're the first team in like 30 years to give up 40 points to Iowa, who's been known to struggle to score. And
Yeah, they just got deflated. And it just seems like when they go on the road this year, it's not been a very good time.
well, they are undefeated at home and defeated on the road, because technically the Apple Cup was a neutral game because it was
Yeah.
not played at their home stadium. So when you look at those games, they've outgained their opponents in each of their losses. Where they've struggled is Grady Gross has not been as lights out as he was last year. He's had a few kicks blocked, he's had a few kicks missed, and it's been the issue of trying to score in the red zone has been the problem. And you can attribute that to a lot of different things. You know, the WSU game, last play of the game, they decided to run a speed option with Will Rogers, not bring in Damon Williams, who's got a little bit more speed and a little bit more juice. And he gets stuffed at the one and they lose that game. One score game. You go on the road to Rutgers. Rutgers is undefeated at the time. They're 3-0 going into that game. The Huskies are 3-1 going into that game. And they go on the road Friday night. Their running back, Jonah Coleman, and him go toe for toe. They outgained Rutgers by 200 yards. They had 500 yards of offense in that game, but they had so many blocked field goals and could not convert in the red zone. Come back, play a complete game against Michigan, and then it wasn't great from the start, and it only got worse against Iowa. So the big question is, who are the Huskies?
Yeah. I mean, as of right now, they're just a home team.
I
They're
think
not a
you can that
complete
I
team.
think you can attribute that to a lot of things. We talked about Kalen DeBoer leaves, goes to Alabama, insert Jedd Fisch. He ends up bringing Brennan Carroll as his offensive coordinator, even though Fisch is still calling the plays. Then you bring in Steve Belichick to run the defense. And the staff, I like the staff. I think they have the ability to do some good things.
I
But
just
when
think
you
they need to
look
get a little
at
bit more just, another year under the belt, another off season, right? To
when you
get
look
just kind of
at
everybody together.
when you look at Huskies that stayed, right? Huskies
Mm,
that stayed, you had a handful of guys that had experience. You really only had one guy offensively that had much play time, and that's Cameron Davis. Injured last year, was going to be that 1-2 punch with Dylan Johnson, and has done some good things for this team. That's it offensively.
and
Right.
defensively, you
Well,
had
sorry,
Cam
I'll
Fab
say
come
Giles
back.
Giles Jackson as well, but it
Right.
was kind of up and down. Defensively is where you've had some guys that have made some plays for this team. You look at your linebacker room. That's probably your strongest unit on this defense. When you throw in Carson Brunner, who's a legacy, who did big things during the playoffs. You got
Mm.
Alfonso Tupatala, who's also another solid linebacker for this team that did get some play. And then you got Cameron Fabiculana and Cam Fab coming from that safety position. I thought he's played pretty well all year. The crazy things for me is you have, oh gosh, I'm gonna just ruin myself right now. Holy moly. I don't want to say it wrong because it was like one of the biggest plays last year in that semi-final game against Texas. Yep, I was right. Elijah Jackson was the starting corner opposite of Jabbar Muhammad, especially down the stretch. You also throw in Mish Powell, who ends up transferring to Miami. But Elijah Jackson is not a starting cornerback full time for this team. This is a guy that I thought could build upon last year. You end up getting Ephesian Prysock from Arizona transferring over, who was probably one of their top corners last year. You throw in Jordan Shaw at the edge position, and then you have some holdovers from last year, like Zach Durfee. This is a guy that played pretty darn well at Sioux Falls, but had to sit out last year because of a double transfer. First school he goes to, doesn't have football, wasn't planning on playing, decided you want to play again, goes to Sioux Falls, tears it up, transfers to UW, said, oh, that's your second transfer. You got to sit out a year, which was BS. But he's been a little bit banged up this year. And then your other guy in the middle that kind of has some experience is transfer from Montana State, Sebastian Valdez. You got Jacob Bandis, who got some playing time sporadically for the Huskies. So you've got a lot of new faces. And
Mm.
some of those guys have a boatload of talent, but you have the guys that stayed, new system. You have a handful of guys that transferred up from Arizona that are staying within the system that they had, at least offensively, not defensively,
Mm.
because you bring in Steve Belichick. And there's got to be some melding that comes together, and you've got to have that team building. You have to go through adversity. When you look at this Husky team, when Kalen DeBoer showed up the first year, let's put it this way, a little bit easier schedule than what you get in the Big Ten, a lot less travel. And you had some guys that stuck with the program, right?
Mm.
And then you bring in Michael Penix, who, when healthy, is one of the best quarterbacks in the game. And that was proven by the previous 2 years. Will Rogers is an above average quarterback. He's not
Mm.
Michael Penix. I think that you can build this team a little bit more with Damon Williams Jr. going into the next couple of years with his skill set. A little bit undersized, but shifty as all get out, has got breakaway speed, and is pretty darn accurate, right?
Mm.
So you've got some pieces where if this staff stays together, that's going to be a big question because Florida not playing so hot. Jedd Fisch possibly going to the SEC is kind of rumored like this could be a 1-year stop for him because this is a guy that's bounced around quite a bit. But when you look at where the Huskies are at right now, they're in a premier conference in the Big Ten.
Mm.
You lost the coach to probably the most premier job in all of college football, Alabama. I think if the Alabama job wasn't open, Kalen DeBoer would still be at Washington.
Right.
So,
Right.
but the people that wouldn't be at Washington, you wouldn't have Jonah Coleman. You would not have Damon Williams,
Mm.
right? And
Right.
those, I think, you wouldn't have Adam Muhammad. Those guys are building blocks for your next thing. And I think that what you see as a little bit of a difference is Jedd Fisch has done a very good job. And you saw that at Arizona last year when I think they finished at 13th in the power rankings. Arizona is not a football school. He did a
Mm.
very good job of recruiting in the 2 years that he was there, or 3. It was a team, they were absolutely terrible, and he built them up to a contender, right? This is a guy that really hammers home recruiting out of high school, relies a little bit on the transfer, had to go heavier this year, but likes to build from within. Caleb DeBoer, where he had success, was getting guys from other programs, right? Let someone
Mm.
else develop them. Let me put the little bit of sauce on them and we'll go from there. So I think
Mm.
that if you can keep this group together of coaches, primarily Carroll, Fisch, and let's call it Belichick as well, I think that you could have a recipe for success going forward in the Big Ten. But this year
Mm.
it's going to be up and down because there's 1 week where they play like world beaters. You watch that Michigan game, they played lights out throughout that entire game. Then
They
you
did.
flip on the next week and you're like, well, what the hell happened against Iowa?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, number 10 ranked in the nation. It's a pretty big deal. And Michigan had lost a game or two, I believe, at this point. Or no, we were the second loss. But they had already lost a game prior. So you're like, okay, well, maybe they're not as invincible as you thought. And then they come into Montlake, right? And just get stomped. So they do have the flashiness, the sizzle, right? But it just needs to all come together for it to work well, right? You need to figure out how to score.
You need to
And
figure out how to play on the road too. That's your biggest testament.
mm,
When you have teams with talent, they usually do well at home. You're in your regular routine, you're all this. Once you get out of that, playing in someone else, it's a little bit louder. You're still gelling with your guys. It's not as cut and dry as it typically is, right?
right.
So when you go on the road, this is going to be a big test because you got college game day there. Indiana is going to be rocking. That student section is going to be lit. And I don't mean
Oh,
like happy, like they're going to be drunk by 11. If college game days in town, they're going to be 3 sheets to the wind. They are going to be loud. They are going to be proud. This is a basketball school that is having a very good run right now and is undefeated, and I think is clocking in at like 15 or 16. So this is a big matchup.
mhm. It is. It is. And you know, kind of the turning point of the season, if you will, right? To kind of end on a good note to close out the last chapter of the season, right? If you come in and win this game, it kind of gives you good momentum again because you did beat number 10 ranked Michigan. Then you get spanked by Iowa, get your bye week, get right. Hopefully everybody gets a little healthy, and then take it to number 15, Nebraska, right? Like, if you
Well,
come in
and
and do
it's not
that,
like you have a cookie cutter last half of the schedule. So you got number 13 ranked Indiana this week. You
all right,
follow
yeah,
that up
sorry.
by hosting USC. Then you go on the road to number 3 Penn State. Then you're at home against UCLA. Then go on the road to the current number 1 ranked team that won't be there for long, the Oregon Ducks. So when you look at that totality there, it's a tough schedule. You got to get 6 wins to get bowl eligible. Right now, when you go down the stretch of your last 5 games, only 2 of those teams aren't ranked. You've already beat a ranked opponent. And I think that when you look at this Husky team, I think it will help getting some players a little bit healthier. So you've got Zach Durfee, who I hope is healthy because the dude is just a monster out there. Carson Bruner's been banged up, sprained AC joint all year and is playing through it, gutting it out in his last year. That guy is the heart and soul of that defense. And you got Alfonso Tupatala, who's been laying hat. I need to see a little bit more from my corners. Prysock was supposed to be a ball hawk. He's got one no picks on the year, 1 fumble forced. So I want to see a little bit more on limiting big plays and creating turnovers. This team is a lot like the Seahawks. They play well enough in pass coverage, but they get kind of gouged by the run. And it's not like we could go make some in-season trades like the Seahawks did today for, Ernest.
Yeah.
But this is a team that I think once they get a little bit healthier can do some things and
Right.
hopefully getting some more continuity offensively to not just rack up the yards, but be able to convert in the end zone and not settle for field goal attempts. I want to be settling for point after attempts.
And also your special teams needs to be a little bit better as well, right? Your kicker, I mean, we're not dealing with the day old kickers of college past where all of them were kind of terrible and there was only like a select few good ones. There's a lot of good kickers now, right? There has been the last couple of years. And for Grady Gross to do what he did last year, be so money on the year, to come to this year and just be a below average kicker, it's
Well,
not a good look.
and with Grady Gross, he's never had the big leg. He was just pretty accurate. He's had a
Right.
handful of kicks that were blocked. He's had a couple that have just slightly missed. Rutgers was the biggest gaff, I think.
And
And then he got one blocked or missed one early against Michigan. So he had like 5 consecutive kicks.
right. And that just comes down to your offensive line there when you're trying to kick, right? Your special teams. They just gotta play better.
Yeah, you got to play well in all facets. I think that coming into this week with a presumably healthier Jonah Coleman, I would I love the story of Cameron Davis, right? This is a guy that has had success with this team. He's a guy that's got a C on his chest. He stuck around this team for his 6th year to finish out his college career at the University of Washington. But dude, Adam Muhammad has the same yard per carry average as Jonah Coleman. They're both a little bit more electric, and I'd like to see them focus a little bit more. I would almost love them at times to go one series. Will Rogers, even though he's got the ungodly passing numbers, almost 2,000 yards through 7 games. That's a pretty good little average right there. But Damian Williams can open up the playbook a little bit more. He makes the defense think a little bit more. And the more that he becomes established as a credible pass threat can really make this offense bloom. And yes, I do want to get Will Rogers shot for him to transfer here, go back in the portal, but decide to stay and really be the elder statement in the quarterback room.
Yeah.
I want him to be ready and go to the NFL and potentially get a job. But the future of this team is not Will Rogers. It is Damon Williams Jr.
Whatever I see from Will Rogers, he's a pocket guy. And there's nothing wrong with that. You somewhat see that in today's NFL with certain players. But it's just not the way of most college football and most of the NFL, right? Everybody is switching to that dual threat. I mean, Lamar Jackson is the perfect example, right? What he's done this year
Well,
has
he's the
been
ultimate example.
well, right, and he has played out of his mind this year. And that's just kind of what everybody's wanting to be, right? Is the next Lamar Jackson, the next Josh Allen, the next you know who, right? And just I feel like the way of just sitting in the pocket, it's just a lost art of football now.
Will Rogers gives you a lot of Derek Carr,
Mm,
Bo Nix type vibes. Bo Nix with a little bit more arm strength and a little less mobility, right?
yeah,
Probably Derek Carr would be a good pro comp for a Will
that's
Rogers
fair.
type guy.
It's been a
I would
starter in the
say,
league for 10 plus years.
I would say, well, that's my closest comp just by his play style, right?
That's fair.
If I were going to give a comp for Damon Williams Jr. right now, it would probably be Jaden Daniels. Can do
That's
it with
fair.
his legs, can do it through the air, does not turn the ball over very much, and is pretty accurate and is a pretty good player. And
Mhm.
I do think that in this game, it is going to be very important for Will Rogers to settle this team down. You're going to need to score early. You're going to need to get some stops defensively early and hopefully get a little bit of a lead
Yeah,
to just level out. But I do want to see uh Damon Williams get in there and ignite the night a little bit, right?
yeah.
Put that little seasoning salt on top that could really make this dish pop. Sorry, I've been
Mhm.
watching a lot of Food Network shows lately, so gotta get that boom
Yeah,
boom boom.
and when you do have that type of player, right, where it does keep the defense on their toes because you never know what they're gonna do, right? And that I think this is gonna be a week where if Will Rogers shows up, right, and sets himself apart from everybody else, I think that's really what you need. You like you said, they need to score early, but they also need to score often. They need to stop stifling themselves and shooting themselves in the foot once they get to red zone territory, right? Scheme up some stuff. I mean, Brendan Carroll's pretty good at his job. I don't know why you're not letting him call plays if he's been with you for the last couple of years, right?
And I would really like to see Jeremiah Hunter get involved more with the experience that he has in the wide
Mm,
receiver room. But you are going to need the likes of Giles Jackson and Denzel Boston to really put this thing over the top. I
yes.
mean, both of those guys are lightning in a bottle. If you were looking at this team, your closest comp, if you're going towards the Seahawks, is Denzel Boston is your DK Metcalf type, except he gets a few more catches.
Mm,
Then you have Giles Jackson, smaller, shifty, good yak. Who's that sound like? JSN. And then you got old reliable, the elder statesman in the room, Tyler Lockett, a guy with sure hands that could see more targets and should see more targets. And I think if you incorporate both those guys a little bit more, you can run that play action pass a little bit more effectively. That's not only going to help out your quarterback, whoever's taking the ball behind center, but it's going to open up a lot of holes in the run game because they do have a ton of talent in their playmaker positions on offense.
they just all have to be clicking, man.
Welcome to the Big Ten, though. Big Ten's all about defenses.
Yep. Yep. And it's been on full display, right? Except for Michigan.
Well, they took advantage of Michigan early and really put the pressure on them, was able to get some turnovers.
And yeah,
But
they did get some picks in that game.
I mean, you've got Indiana that's sitting at 13th overall. They house Nebraska, who beat Rutgers, but Maryland not ranked. Northwestern, they beat them 41-24. The Huskies did not play super well offensively against Northwestern, but they held them to diddly nothing offensively. So when you look at their schedule so far, they haven't played a ton of people. Yeah, they played UCLA, but UCLA they at that point in time in week 3 was playing very subpar football. So this is a team that's going to be riding high. You've got college game day. Expectations can weigh heavy. And we saw that last year with the Huskies, right? As we went down the stretch. Oregon State, solid team, playing in the elements down in Corvallis. A lot closer game than we expected. The Huskies in the Apple Cup, hands down, a more NFL ready roster than WSU. And that came down to a fourth round end around to Rome.
Yeah. Yeah.
That got you the win in that game. So heavy lies the crown of expectation. And hopefully UW can roll in to Indiana and just slap them across the face. Bring them back down to earth, baby.
Yeah, I agree. So it's just gonna be an interesting road the rest of the season.
They're a fun but frustrating watch because you don't know what you're gonna get week in, week out. I harken back to a classic film called Forrest Gump.
All right.
The Huskies games are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Fair enough. But you know what you're going to get if you follow us over on social media.
You're going to get something. If you interact with us, we'll interact right back. How can you do that? By following us and commenting on things that we have been lackluster on. But if you want to see lackluster at its finest, you can follow me, your boy Coach Red, on X at the Real Coach Red, on Instagram at the Real_Coach Red, TikTok at the Real Coach Red. Also find the show over on YouTube. Search Kickin' It with Coach Red. Like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, leave a comment or two. Cain, where you at?
You can find me over on Twitter, Cain2406, TikTok, Cain0624. Also follow the show's socials over on Twitter and Instagram at Coach Red Pod. Follow us. Do it, freaking do it.
And as always, stay fresh.
Stay fresh, peeps.
Peace.